Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Show. Then I want to start with a question. Have you ever left a doctor's appointment feeling confused, dismissed, or completely misunderstood? Anybody? If you're nodding your head yes, then this episode is for you, because in this episode I'm going to be talking about how to create healthy, effective boundaries with the medical community, steps that you can take to create clarity, like what are the best ways of going into a doctor's appointment, and info on when it might be time to ditch your MD. So before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, do me a favor, say hello in the comments. We are a very friendly group of people. Make sure that you hit the button and you subscribe and you hit the bell so you get notified every time I roll out new important material, which is every Tuesday and every Thursday, and I wouldn't want you to miss a thing. Thank you guys for being here. It's so exciting for me that you're in this YouTube channel with me, because of course if it wasn't for you I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. So thanks for being here and thanks for being so active and witnessing each other. I just really appreciate you. So comments, questions, I read everything and I love to highlight them. So I'm going to highlight one from Alexander Rubio, and this is under the video called Answering Cues About Anger, Reactive Abuse, Passive Aggressive, and Healthy Anger. And Alexander says, I'm so grateful for you for the wisdom you've imparted. Your channel has helped me understand myself and others and made me a better human being. Wow, that literally just made my day, Alexander. So thank you for taking the time to leave a comment, because really, you guys are it. You're the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. All right, so let's move into today's content, shall we? Let's start with the background of why it can be hard to have an empowered or an assertive relationship with our medical community, with our doctors. Well, part of it is that many of us were raised to think that doctors were above reproach, that they were the experts, that what they say goes. Like, what do we know? Even though that sounds very old school, me saying it right now, it sounds kind of weird. You're like, does anyone really think that? But I'm talking about our collective unconscious, because there was a period of time, especially in the US and North America, where doctors had like unfettered power to a degree, right? There wasn't the internet. We weren't able to look up things and understand things the way that we can today. And they were sort of the experts in what they said went. Now, even if that has changed somewhere in our collective unconscious, it's kind of still the same for many of us. I have my own personal experience with being diagnosed with cancer many years ago, and I think I was under the false assumption the doctor knew best and that I should just go with what they were saying, because of course I was scared having a cancer diagnosis, a potential cancer diagnosis, right? Because I didn't know it was cancer until after the surgery. So beforehand, I was terrified that it was that and how advanced was it and what was going to happen. And I had a doctor at a very well-known cancer center in New York City tell me, if you can make a decision in the next 5 minutes, I can do the surgery tomorrow. And Vic was just my boyfriend at the time, but we were there and we talked about it. And we both were like, all right, well, let's just get it out and then we'll go from there, But I would not suggest that you make a decision about having major surgery in 5 minutes. And I don't think it was right of that surgeon to put me in that position, right? Because I was definitely scared. So anyway, that led to other things that happened because I did make that decision so quickly. And I won't tell you the whole story. I've told it once or twice before somewhere, but that's not what this episode is about. But that sort of rash decision that I made led me to having that same surgery on the other half of my thyroid. Less than 6 months later, doing treatment again, radiation again. It was a lot. And if I had made a decision in more than 5 minutes, I think I could have avoided that. But I didn't feel empowered in that relationship with that particular surgeon. And of course, the next surgery, I fired that guy and I went somewhere else with someone where I was like, well, I need to tell you the whole story, and you need to be willing to care about what my intuition says and how I feel. And he was like, great, let's make a cup of tea and talk about it. And I was like, okay, maybe this guy's my surgeon. And he was. And he was wonderful and basically was willing to do that other surgery based on my intuition, not really based on any medical evidence that I needed it, but somewhere down deep, I felt like I did. And what was discovered on the other half of my thyroid was a different kind of, more aggressive, potentially, cancer. And so if I had stayed with that first surgeon who told me I was nuts and I was being hysterical, that I thought there was something wrong with the other half of my thyroid by my intuition alone, we don't know what would have happened. But I imagine it wouldn't have been the good outcome that I have been blessed to have. So I'm very passionate about this topic. And really why it's coming back up is that I've been talking a lot about menopause, perimenopause and menopause, and people from the audience have been asking me questions about how to deal with doctors who are dismissive. I read something online the other day saying that somebody went to their OBGYN and the OBGYN said perimenopause is a myth, and asked them if they had a psychiatrist because they thought it was a mental issue. Now, that is extreme. And of course, perimenopause is not a myth. It's an actual thing that we experience. So that sort of brought the whole medical community and boundaries back to the forefront of my own mind, because many of you have had not the best experiences too. So I wanted to give you a little bit of my hard-earned wisdom and ideas about how to do it. And boundaries have everything to do with what we're talking about. So if you are going to a doctor, first of all, I want you to change your mind, right? And think about it like you're interviewing them, right? And I know this also, we have to talk about the fact that a lot of people don't have insurance. And what does it mean if you don't have insurance? Can you really be picky? Well, this is where boundaries come in, because you can certainly be assertive. But if you have insurance, my feeling is I want you to go into it, or no matter what your situation, I want you to go into it thinking about, it's not like they're doing you a favor, right? They're working for you, and there are other doctors out there. So the psychological mindset has to be that you're basically interviewing the doctor. And I also think that you have to always get a second opinion, especially if you're talking about surgery. Anything that's major, you have to get a second opinion. And any doctor that's worth their salt will want you to get a second opinion. This is a very common practice. It protects them and it protects you. So from the beginning, I just want to say that getting a second opinion is something. Don't be lazy. Do it, right? Like, yes, it takes more time and energy. And yes, you can't do it as fast, but it's worth it, because you will definitely get better care if you get a consensus or if you hear someone else's perspective on it. I do a lot of research for anyone in my family, for my mother, for Vic, for me, anything. Because here's the thing. There is some expert out there who is the most expert at whatever it is that you're dealing with. And even if you can't see them, hey, maybe they're in the UK, who knows? But you can read what they're writing about your situation. So I do a lot of pre-work before even getting into the phone call phase of seeing if they're taking new clients or whatever. I want to know, who is the person who only does this thing? Who is the person who's become super masterful at this thing that we need right now? And you can do the same. I mean, listen, the internet is free. So do research, read the medical journals if you've got something complicated happening. But either way, I want you to go into it with an empowered point of view, that it's really about whether you like them, not whether they like you. So you're going to do your research and you're going to talk to the medical professionals in your life. If you have an OBGYN that you like very much, and then they come out with something that says, I don't believe in menopause, or you're not suffering, or all of your suffering is in your head, that to me is a major red flag. So we have to look at the medical team who's supposed to be working for us. How do they talk to us? How do they treat us? Part of my problem with that original surgeon was that this dude was so condescending. He was so mad that I was an educated patient, basically. I felt like 5 different times he felt like saying, would you just shut up? Like literally. That's definitely what his eyes were saying to me. So after the surgery and after my follow-up with him, I couldn't fire him fast enough, especially when I felt that something more needed to be done. But I would never, and from that point forward, I've never stayed with a doctor. I'm so clear when I'm going in about what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone to partner with me for my optimal wellness. And that means you're going to be responsive and you're going to get back to me. And if you have a portal, you're actually going to use it, because that would be my preference, is to just shoot them a quick note in the portal. And that if I have questions, you're going to answer them. And that you're not going to be mad that I have a brain. And if you are mad that I have a brain, I'm going to fire you. Because life is too short, people. Not to mention, I don't want you having an unnecessary surgery or having to do the same thing twice because someone didn't listen to you or didn't care about the way that you felt. I mean, obviously I worked it through in therapy, but that's a pretty traumatizing experience. Feeling so unimportant and feeling like someone else had all of this power over me when I was in such a vulnerable situation. So you want to push back. I had an endocrinologist recently in the past 2 years who was like, why are you on hormone replacement therapy? Which is another part of this conversation, which I will have later. Here's the thing, you guys. Also, clarity. I'm not an MD. I'm not suggesting you do anything. I just want to empower you with boundaries. So I don't want to hear from anyone that they're like, I went and did hormone replacement therapy because you told me to. I did not tell you to. This is what I'm doing for me. It is working for me. So this endocrinologist was like, well, why are you doing that? And what are they, and I was actually going to a place that was run for women, run by women, because that's what I wanted. And this guy was so, again, kind of condescending. And I said, well, first of all, I mean, he's an endocrinologist, and I wanted to tell him because it does have to do with the same system in the body. But I was like, why are you threatened? Like, I couldn't figure out why. I was like, well, I was suffering from menopausal symptoms, which is why I did it. But I'm curious to know about your negative vibe on it, like what's going on. And he was like, no, I just don't understand. And I'm like, okay. Anyway, P.S., he retired less than a year later, so maybe this is a more modern thing. I do not know. But all I know is that I was absolutely going to fire him if he did not retire, because I didn't like him that much to begin with. Anyway, moving into anyone who's dismissive, anyone who you feel like you're bothering with what it is that you need to talk about, that's not a good thing to have as a doctor. That's just not good. Well, I don't care what it is you're talking about. You want to feel like that person is in the healing arts because that's what they want to do and that they're there to help you, not that you're there annoying them. And I've had that experience more than once, but I've never stayed with those doctors after my cancer experience. I became super discerning, and this is where boundaries come in. Having internal boundaries. This is about you, right? Your boundaries with yourself. What are you going to tolerate when it comes to the care that you get? If it makes you uncomfortable, it matters. If you have something on your mind, you need to be in a situation where you say it, even if that doctor isn't that open to it, right? I would still say the thing. I would eventually fire the person, but you're paying, and your job is to assert yourself so that you can get the best medical care possible. And a lot of that has to do with the person's attitude towards you, how they interact. Are they listening at all? Do they remember anything about your history? Do they care? And listen, I understand that the medical community is under a lot of pressure, that insurance, especially in the US, is terrible, that there's HMOs that give them 15 minutes to see clients. Listen, I'm not saying that there's not a lot on the medical community. There is. But that's not what this episode is about, right? This episode, I'm not vilifying doctors. All I want to do is empower you to get the best care that you possibly can. And a lot of times we're self-sabotaging in respect to getting the best care. And that's exactly what this episode is about. So I want you to think about your internal boundaries matter. What you think you deserve. If someone is dismissive, you don't deserve that. If they're a doctor and they're supposed to be helping you. I've had really good luck with nurse practitioners, and I really do like to see women more than I like to see men. That's my personal preference, right? Remember, your boundaries are your preferences, your limits, your deal breakers. That is my preference, and it's my right to have that preference, especially when it comes to anything that has to do with the female body. I feel like a woman who has a female body is probably going to be more understanding about what it's really about. Again, for all the male gynecologists out there, I'm not dissing you. I'm just saying what my preference is for me is that I want someone who can really understand where I'm coming from personally. So your internal boundaries are very important. And in the guide that goes along with this episode, terricole.com/guide, I'm going to be giving you some questions and different things that you can do to have a better experience when you are going to doctor's appointments, especially if it's something that's scary. Because a lot of times we forget things, like when we're dealing with stuff where we're feeling threatened. So before you go in, you want to make a list of your concerns and questions. That's the first thing. You want to be able to clearly talk about what you've been experiencing, like what you're doing there. And if you feel like in the moment you kind of choke when it comes to talking about stuff like this, you're going to write that down. You want to make sure that you're talking about anything. If you're on other medication, if you're, giving them information about you. Are you on a particular diet? Are you, hopefully if they're your GP, they know you're on what other medication you're on. But if they're not your GP, they may not. So it's talking about that. And don't be afraid. Try not to be embarrassed about anything that you are there for. It doesn't matter if it's menopause and you're talking about painful sex, talk about it. By the way, if you have not been through menopause, that's at least one of the symptoms I experienced. That was super not fun, by the way. I actually just interviewed experts on menopause. So you're going to have a bunch of episodes coming out talking about it because I just feel like nobody's talking about it, or not a lot of people. And I really want to get the doctors talking about it, informing us. There's nothing to be ashamed of. This is normal. This is called being lucky enough to live long enough to go through menopause, right? So all of it, a gift and a privilege, and there's definitely things that we can do to make it better. So that will be for another full-on episode. But back to the boundaries and doctors and having a better experience. Before you leave that doctor's office, make sure that you understand what happened. What we did when my mother was going through cancer during the pandemic is that if they wouldn't let us in the room, right, the only one, she had to go in alone into the actual hospital, so I'd be in the car. But I would FaceTime in to the meeting. And then my other sister would call in and record so that we had everything that we needed to understand what happened. I'm not going to make my 85-year-old mother try to remember everything that went on, even though her mind is fine, right? We put things in place so that we're supporting a deeper understanding. And now that the pandemic we're pushing past it, I think you're allowed to bring other people into the room. And I feel like it's a great idea. And some places will have assistants, like people who will come in, and they're just like patient advocates who will take notes, who will send them to you. There's a lot of things that are available, a lot of support that's available if you look for it. And always get, as I said before, you always want to get a second opinion. And before you go into any of this, if you do have insurance, you want to check with your insurance what is covered. You want to understand your insurance. You guys, I know that this is so intense, but it's so important. Because if you end up getting surgery and you didn't know that the anesthesiologist was not within your insurance, you could get a bill for 10 grand. It's really something that you would think someone else was going to be watching that for you, but they're not. Same thing with using labs. You want to make sure and ask them, where are you sending the blood work? I want to make sure they take my insurance, because I actually have had that happen. So it sounds like a lot. It is a lot. But these are all boundary issues, because what ends up happening is that if you don't do it, you don't end up with the care that you want and that you need. But you also may end up spending lots of money that you don't actually need to, and that was totally avoidable. So in the guide, I'm going to give you some ideas of ways to go into meetings with doctors in an empowered way. I'm going to give you some conversational boundaries in those situations. And I'll give you a couple of ideas of how to strengthen your internal boundaries when it comes to dealing with the medical community. And what that is going to be is you understanding why you relate to them the way that you do. So there's going to be a couple of questions that are going to be more like your downloaded blueprint around the medical community. Because if you've had childhood experiences, all of these things, if they're not fully processed, can impact how you go into your medical doctor appointments today. So I know that was a lot. I hope that it was helpful. If you love this, please share it with the people in your world, because really, you guys, I just want you to be as empowered as you possibly can in all areas of your life, and your physical wellness is one of those areas. So I hope you have an amazing week. And as always, take care of you.